Alright, so about 2 balance patches ago, when we were rating upcoming balance, I did a video talking about the state of PvP balance, and I challenged myself to make 3 changes to every class: a buff, a nerf, and a tweak or a shave, right? And it was a fun idea and an interesting prospect, and I liked the challenge. However, because I could only pick a couple of things, I think people really didn't get the bigger picture with a lot of the changes. It's hard to express all the things and list out all the really important stuff with the class. So I want to talk about balance again today. However, I'm not going to limit myself to a rule set like that. Instead, what we're going to talk about is just nerfs. So this video is what I'd like from balance coming up. Any of these things I'd be really happy with. There's going to be some overlap with the previous video simply because changes I think would be very good for the game still haven't occurred. And they're going to be nerfs only. The reason why I'm going with nerfs only is because really I think a nerf is the most powerful thing the balance team can do. A single nerf makes every other skill in the entire game better by comparison. Much more effective to nerf OP stuff than buff underpowered stuff, because one nerf to an OP slot just brings everything up in line all at once, right? So we'll go with the nerf perspective here. There's about 1 million things I'd love to buff, and many of the things I'm saying I'd like to nerf in a minute on various classes, I would love to complement with buffs, but we'll just stick it there and talk about reining in some of the power creep on some of the best in slot things that are ran in the game at the moment. Okay, so let's start off by talking about equipment. I did this last time. I thought it was a really valuable section of the video. Largely, my feelings haven't actually changed. So I want to talk about runes, amulets, stuff like this. The 3 nerfs I would list, first of all, is again to agility. I mentioned this before. So the agility sigil gained 5 seconds of swiftness and 2 seconds of quickness when you swap to this weapon in combat. This sigil is run on so many meta builds, it will make your head spin. Most builds find an excuse and a reason to put agility on there, whether it's because they get synergy out of having wide boon access or just simply spamming boons, because it's not just quickness here, it's swiftness too, whether they want the swiftness to actually move around, or most likely because you're probably using the quickness to cheese out crit casts on various animations. Soul Beast gets extra synergy out of this by bouncing the quickness, thus juggling the rest of their boons. And honestly, I think that one of the main things that's important to me and fun about PvP in the game is seeing animations and being able to react, knowing whether you want to interrupt something or dodge it or move away from it. Being able to react to what your enemy does is cool, and enemies baiting your dodges by cancel casting their stuff is also cool. Quickness kind of drives a lot of that away, and everyone having access to quickness on whatever really cool animation that they like, generally I don't think it's been very good for the game. I would rather this sigil not exist. So my first nerf, I would get rid of this sigil. Still, I'm advocating that. I don't think sigil of agility is necessarily that great for the game, and if that unfairly nerfs certain builds, say like Glacial Hammer Core Guard, right, which already took a bit of a beating last patch. If it does that, that's fair enough, but you look at those classes themselves and build them back up to strength within them. I think globally and as a general thing for the game, I don't like agility. I wouldn't have it here. Another nerf, since this time we're not limited to just say 1, I would still say to nerf monk runes. I know that people don't think about support, particularly for PvP that much, but this is more of a thought for the entire game, honestly. For me, this is just so ludicrously power crept and infinitely better than any other support, you know, heal-oriented rune in the game. It's very hard to justify taking other things. Maybe you'll see someone advocate flock on a firebrand with manchas, maybe every now and then. But come on, monk just gives you so much, especially after that update. The degree to which this was buffed still baffles me as to why the devs ever went for it. I want to see the 10% flat healing effectiveness on this deleted, so that to get your 10% benevolence out of the rune set, you have to play into the boon splash mechanic, and then I want to see that the boon splash mechanic is actually refined to only last a shorter duration, maybe 1 or 2 seconds instead of 3. So you really need to spam a lot of boons to get a lot of effectiveness out of monk. Otherwise, you go to some of the other really cool ones that currently are just in the shadows of it for no good reason. The last rune that I'd actually like to nerf as well, I'm actually running right now on this character, and we'll be talking about Rev in a second, but leadership runes. I think the leadership runes are really powerful runes. They're very versatile. They're used on a lot of classes, and too often I think to myself, well, I'll throw leadership on there. What I don't like about leadership is that they're basically filling the same role as Lissa, but just more effectively. This one's AoE. This one has better stats associated with it. This one has more access to boon duration, while Lissa mixes in Condi duration for some reason. I think that they're both trying to do the same thing, and this one is just clearly crept beyond beyond the other one. I would not remove leadership from the PvP pool, but what I would do is change that convert 3 conditions into just cleanse conditions at the very least, and I would make it only on you, not on your allies at the same time. Lissa this way can stay as a conversion mechanic and maybe make Lissa AoE. Then you've created some kind of balance between them, but leadership in general, I think, is very, very powerful. I still think there's too many boons in the game, and you're just adding more boons here by having this as a convert instead of just a cleanse for condies. I think it would still exist, it would still be ran, but it would refine in some of the uglier sides of Guild Wars 2 these days that I don't like very much. So there you go, that's all I got to say on items. There's a lot more we could do. We could talk about amulets and stuff, but that's a nice little opening. Let's look at Rev now. So Rev I'm starting with because I actually think is one of the strongest things in PvP, full stop right now. And it's kind of amazing how over the Path of Fire days, it was so dismissed and sneered at for so long, and now it feels like it's this insane thing. Bluntly explained, what's so strong about Rev is that it hits like a truck, and it has lots of access to hard mitigation, as in evades, hard CCs to blow out and keep people away, plenty of stun breaks, and even further evades and blocks, and a lot of mobility. It has these 3 things combined that is just completely off the wall, basically. So what I actually would rather happen with Rev here is to cut back on the mobility and increase counterplay through animations. Again, I don't actually mind that the potential of a Rev is to hit like a truck. I would leave that as it is, but I think the access and speed to which it gets a lot of its stuff feels very unfair, and I would rather be refined a little bit. I actually think one of the best changes the game has made in a very long time was a Rev change on Sword Offhand recently. When Shackling Wave was added to the game, it burst out extremely quickly. The devs added a cast time on it, and now it's a really fun skill. You can see it coming, you can dodge it properly, and as a Rev, landing it feels really satisfying. The treatment they did to Shackling Wave is, in general, what I adore, and will kind of advocate basically to see on all kinds of places across many of the nerfs you're going to see in this video. Straight away, staying on Sword Offhand, I want the same treatment on Deathstrike. Deathstrike is a port that does 2 strikes, massive damage, applies Fury, which has synergies with Invocation Line and whatnot, also applies Chilled and Slow. It does a ton of different things on a Shadow Step, right? So my number 1 nerf for this, you could obviously say no more Fury, you could say no more Chill, you could say no more Slow, you could say refine the damage away. But what I say is put a little bit more of a cast time on it. That's all I say. If you can see the Rev is gearing up for his Deathstrike in, it's now a thing that is more readily available to the player. I would also say, on top of this, if I was going to make another change, to actually slightly increase the cooldown. I think that that's a really healthy way of balancing skills a lot of the time. And since this is a mobility-oriented skill, I would be more likely to increase the recharge on this, as I'd actually do at many places you'll see elsewhere in this video, because I just think people move too fast. I think you should be very precise. Deathstrike, because it's a mobility skill, it's not just a tool for aggression, it's a tool for escape. If I'm fighting a guy here and I'm suddenly in danger, I can target, you know, the bench back here, and I can port down away from my enemies. I can use the same, obviously, for phase traversal. It's a technique any core guard will teach you all about because, you know, it's very essential for them. And I think just a slightly higher cooldown on Deathstrike, such an insane skill, is warranted. Ultimately, it's the skill 5 on the kit, right? Which means it should be very strong. It should be very identifiable, and I think that's fine. So I'm not actually saying to change the damage or even some of these other totally busted effects. I just want people to be able to see a little bit more when it's coming, and crucially, be able to interrupt it. The way it's currently designed, that's really not part of the game, and that means slightly less fun to me. So next, what I would actually look at for Rev, and again, I think this is genuinely one of the most busted things in the game right now, and I don't have many changes for it, is Herald. It's not much, but the F2 skill, which came in with a Herald rework a while ago, is actually extremely strong. While you're in Glint's form, Dragon Stance, it's really not that powerful. People don't pop it. But while you're in Shiro, if you double tap this bad boy, this animation here, this wave on a, it's called True Nature, right? And it's on a radius of 600. That is extremely deadly. It goes through walls. It has very high quality of life. The radius is huge. I think this snatches down far too many kills. It's that extra little bit of oomph that pushes Rev that little bit over the edge. It casts too quickly, It's very accessible, and as an unblockable thing that goes through walls with a 600 radius, I don't think is acceptable. This skill feels really cheesy whenever, you know, the Rev scores a good kill with it, and just slightly overtuned. What I would argue with this is to reduce the radius. You can leave the rest, you can keep the idea of trading it for extra boon removal, but reduce the radius down from 600, so you still have to be pretty close, and then I think it's okay. Finally for Rev, I think the devs were on the right idea last patch, where they were nerfing Rev. They were going for Might, and they seemed a bit outdated with what they thought correct builds were, and what people were running, but they were going for Might, and I think they were right to go for Might, so I would look at Notoriety. Notoriety is 2 traits in 1, okay? First of all, Might grants you more power and less condi damage, which on its own is significant and interesting and fine, okay? But then also, on top of that, it's gain Might whenever you use a stance skill, and gain even more Might if that stance skill happens to be a Shiro skill. So, I think that this trait has far too much. If I could go really heavy with it, I would totally remove 1/2 of those effects. I would make it a single trait instead of 2 traits rolled in one. I'd have it be Might Acquisition or Might Augmentation, one or the other. But more realistically, I doubt that such a large pendulum change in a single update is smart. And what I would instead say is to drop the Shiro Might down to be uniform with other stance Might, and have it be like 1 for each. Or maybe you can have them both on 2. But I would look at Notoriety as well. Again, I'm a big believer. One of my big philosophies when I look at balance and the way the game is played is that solo Might access shouldn't come too easy. I like the idea of Might building up in team-oriented things. I like stuff like Empower and Ghastly Breach, and even skills that aren't run like For Great Justice and Blood is Power and things like these. I think that's all really fun. Building the Might up when you're in these big epic team fight engagements rather than just everyone's running around with tons all the time. And so I think the devs were right to look at Might, even if it's as minor as it was last patch. And to keep going, I would look at Notoriety next. That's it for Rev. I actually wouldn't change anything else. I wouldn't change anything defensive. I've obviously culled away a little bit of its range. Some people are going to say that's way too little for Rev, but I would rather keep going in smaller packets. And that's what I'm doing for all these classes. Some of these classes, some of these nerfs, you're going to see I've got barely anything. Because, funnily enough, writing the scripts for this video, I realized some classes I actually don't think are too ludicrous, and we'll get to soon enough. But yeah, there you go. Rev, top of the list. Let's stay with the heavies now and do a very simple heavy. Let's go over to Warrior. So there's a lot we could talk about for Warrior, particularly considering everything I just said about solo Might. But I think a strength Warrior kind of lends itself to the Might idea, and I don't actually want to look at that too much here. Warrior in general, I think, is extremely strong, but has a very refined, cleared place. So when it comes to the Nerf train, there's actually not too much I'd be looking for. Number 1, though, is this, Rampage. It's what I suggested before, and I'll suggest it again. I think the massive cooldown drop we saw, how long ago now? 6-7 months ago, really opened people's eyes to this skill, and I'd like to see the cooldown be increased once again, not back to its old levels, but somewhere in the middle. Don't forget that the update where they improved the Rampage cooldown was the same update where they got rid of Surging Runes, which gave people even less reason to run Signet of Rage. So I think this can definitely go back up on its cooldown, and people might have a slightly more interesting decision to make here, and also less automatic I win buttons for Warriors in fights that they were otherwise losing, less CC potential and swing potential when they get up to the mid fights, and I think that that's fine. Rampage, slightly longer cooldown, and it keeps it still being able to do all the powerful side nodey incredible warrior stuff we're talking about, but you just refine in the thing that we see everywhere. Genuinely, one of the most annoying and aggravating things about PvP for me over the past few months is just Rampage constantly. Rampage, Rampage, Rampage. You're likely to see 4 or 5 of them every game, and it's not just warrior, it's because a lot of engineers run Elixir X too. We'll get to that later. But I just think there's just too much of it. And I like Rampage. I think it's a very clear skill. I think it's a cool skill. I don't actually think it's as OP as a lot of people do. I would still increase the cooldown on this so that even if people are using it, I just see a little bit less of it every single game. The other change, and this is the only other change I would recommend for Warrior right now. I know, we could talk about so many other things. We could talk about Magebane Tether and its synergies with Might Makes Right. We could do lots of different things. But I actually want to talk about Bull's Rush. Bull's Rush to me is a versatile enough skill as a 900 range gap closer with a 3-second knockdown and such a massive base damage on it you can hit for well over 5k to 8k on a single strike. As well, it's ripping a mobile, as well it synergizes with peak performance. That thing is a powerful tool. What I don't think it should have on top of all of that is evade frames. Now, I'm well aware that one of the most fun things to experience in a warrior 1v1 is to see his bulls rush and you counter his bulls rush with your own bulls rush, but you press the button later. So when his packet tries to hit you, you're evading and then yours immediately hits him and then you arc the arcing slice and you win, right? I know how fun that is. I know how strong this feels. I also know that for a long time it wasn't evade frame at all and it felt really frustrated to be CC'd in the middle of bulls rush, but it should feel frustrated to be CC'd in the middle of bulls rush. That should be the counter to the skill. This is too much of a tool useful for too many things, and I think that single change, Bulls Rush not being an evade, first of all brings warriors down a significant peg, and also gives them finally a little bit more of an option when it comes to utility skills. I think warriors feel very stagnant in terms of like what they feel like they can actually run and use, and freeing up their utility skills, I don't think anyone's really going to complain about too much. So yes, I would no longer have Bulls Charge be an evade frame, and I would hit Rampage. I'd actually leave Warrior, largely speaking, in the same place for the next little while on that. Let's do the final heavy now as well, which is Guardian, which, as I alluded to earlier, I actually think is quite interesting in that when I really sit down and think about Guardian right now as it stands in PvP, I don't think it's really on my list of something that desperately needs nerfs, all right? Core Guard already got significant nerfs before. It's still played, and it's still very strong, and it's still potential to do things, but it got a big knockdown with the Righteous Retaliation change, which I was actually advocating and ended up going into the game a while ago. So I think Core Guard's in okay places. I think DH is in okay places. You know, could be stronger. Both of these things could be stronger. We don't see them running rampant. We don't see them in every game. We don't see people absolutely wrecking face with very little attention as they're playing in the games. I think neither of those things really need nerfs. And then we have Firebrand, which obviously is very strong in the Firebrand Scourge duo and a very good teamfight carry, but tends to be, for the majority of games, the majority of AT queues, ranked queues, people don't really know how to utilize the combo that well. It's very few teams, very few players that work very well. It's really in very rigid, structured compositions and players who know their roles very well, where Firebrand Scourge really shines. And I don't see it as the hardest of carries that it once upon a time was. It's had a ton of tome nerfs recently. I actually think even Firebrand is pretty much okay, and I don't want to keep nerfing away supports. I think supports are really interesting, and I think that they create changes in the kind of compositions people run. You can definitely break through Firebrand, so I don't really think it needs much. The main thing people will be looking at for a nerf, I think, is Signet of Mercy. They'll say, well, look, this thing's too strong. But I say be careful of that. Signet of Mercy you might want nerfed because you think about it so much in games, but that's a powerful and exciting experience to me, thinking about Signet of Mercy. Clicking the Guardian to see if his passive's there, to know if it's up. When you're playing a thief, holding off your steal for well after the downstate goes through so you can steal into the Signet of Mercy and interrupt the res attempt. Or if you're a Necro, you're holding that corrupt boon. There's a lot of really engaging and fun, exciting strategy that actually goes around Signet of Mercy. It's a strong skill, I know. In a lot of ways, it's defining how many of us teamfight at the moment. But that's fun, and it's counterplayable. I think it works, even for the cooldown that it's on. Even when you compare this to other res skills on other characters in the game, and you see Signet of Mercy just seems to be so much better than them, based on the fact you get passive benefit out of it. The cooldown's pretty low, the cast time is okay. Even with all of that in mind, I actually like this part of the game, and I don't think it really needs a nerf. So what does need a nerf on Guardian right now? Well, I'm not sure. I've got two things that I think would be nice. First of all, in line with just generally wanting mobility to go down, I would look at Judge's Intervention, and I would look at Sword 2, and I would simply hit their recharge rate a little bit. I'd bump their recharges up. They're such powerful tools. They're very important mechanisms. I like the idea that if somebody blows these offensively, they're really putting themselves in deep for a long time. I don't like the idea of them coming up far too quickly. So I would just increase the cooldown of both of those. There's also I find it very hard quite often to justify, say, taking Scepter over Sword in the game at the moment. Sword 2 is just so powerful with the blind pulse, with all the movement that you can do with it. And you get the symbol on top. Scepter obviously has its own problems, but I think Sword is just very, very strong. I would just make those cooldowns a little bit longer, and that's not anything against Guardian or thinking Guardian really needs a big nerf. It would just be in accordance of trying to bring down a little bit of the access to mobility. The burst of mobility would be the same. You could still do the cool stuff. You could still go JI Sword 2 and blow someone up or whatever, but just less regularly. And if you do that, you're committing to the fight a little bit heavier, makes the game a bit more deadly, and people have to be really sure about what they're doing. That's all I would say. And then the other change I would say for Guardian is Dragon Hunter. And I know I already said I don't really think Dragon Hunter needs nerfs. I'd actually like to see some more incentives to play Dragon Hunter. However, when it comes to DH, Spear of Justice, I love this skill. I think it's a very cool skill. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it. If you're a Condi DH, you can hold it on people to keep pulsing burn. You can pop it for the early CC to nab people into traps. You can just leave it on people and bait their dodges. So much fun stuff you can do with Spear of Justice, but it's not counterplayable enough to me. It's far too fast of an animation, and the velocity is very, very quick. So just opposing Spear of Justice, I don't really like it. And if there ever were further incentives to play DH, I kind of cringe at the thought of constantly having to interact with this as it's currently implemented. Again, just a little bit of either a longer cast time, which would be my main advocate because then we could interrupt it as a part of counterplay, or slow down the velocity. Slowing down the velocity gives you more time to dodge, but also makes it feel more clunky for the player. So I don't know. I just like a little bit, maybe another 1/4 of a second on the cast time for Spear of Justice. And that's it. That's genuinely all I have to say for Guardian. I don't really think it needs much of a nerf bat here. Feel free to disagree. Next, let's do the light armors and start off with Mesmer. I actually have a laundry list of things to talk about with Mesmer, so let's get into it. Mesmer's Mirage specifically has obviously been nerfed several times in recent patches, and you might think, well, it's been nerfed lots of times, we should stop there, right, WP? And indeed, it has fallen out of favor as a side noder for a lot of players, but actually I say no, I say it's still very powerful, and there's a lot of kind of gross things about it that I don't enjoy. I play an awful lot of Mirage, and there's certain things that I just think are really ugly, so let's move on in. This is probably one of the biggest things that I've got like a lot of different nerfs I'd like to see. Let's talk about Pistol first of all. I think Pistol is majorly power crept over recent years. I like the idea of having a hard CC on range, and I think it's an important tool for the profession. I like the decision between this and Torch, but I think it's too much of an easy choice to go Pistol at the moment, particularly because of how strong Magic Bullet is. Now, Magic Bullet as a range stun and so on I think is fine. What I'd like to see change about this is the bounces. This thing bounces through 3 targets, which makes it extremely strong in any kind of downstate scenario, where you can just throw the Magic Bullet randomly on one player and might even interrupt multiple reses all at once with it. But also, you guys might not notice this, in games, it just tends to be whenever you're in engagement near a Mirage that's running Pistol, you get these random dazes that sometimes hit crucial things, and I can promise you, it's not that the Mirage has realized that you're in the middle of a heal skill and has calculated the velocities and the trajectory and the odds that he'll hit his first target and the bullet will bounce over to you and get this crucial thing. No, it's brain dead gameplay and it's accidental playmaking because the bounces move over to other things. It's extremely frustrating. I don't think it needs to bounce. Look at how strong this skill is. Without a bounce, it's fine. So I would remove that first of all. And removing these kind of brain dead elements, that's one of the big things I'd like to see from this class. Staying with Pistol. Pistol 4 does so much bleed, it's unreal. It just doesn't need to hit that hard. I would take the chance to bleed down a little bit. And then, yeah, I think we're in a much more appropriate discussion now when looking at Pistol versus Torch. Or, you know, hell, Pistol even seems somewhat viable on power specs, right? And now maybe we see Focus gets a little bit more of a look in, though obviously some people do on power specs already. That's a different discussion. Next, I want to look at the Mantras. So, Mantras have a bit of a reputation as this thing everyone hates. Mantra Pain, for example, is very spammy. It's just keep cycling through it, keep rolling damage. I'd actually leave Mantra Pain as it is because it has so little utility and playmaking potential. Any Mesmer that goes into this is really forcing themselves into the big fight and the big damage, and they're going to have to, you know, kite out very quickly. I don't think it has enough playmaking potential to justify being nerfed. However, the one that is extremely strong is Mantra of Distraction. I love this skill. Anytime you have a hard CC, an interrupt-capable thing on utilities or an F button, it's extremely potent because you can, no matter what you're doing, always hold it and get ready to interrupt a heal skill. Particularly heals are the big one, or, you know, resurrects or whatnot. This skill is amazing. It's amazing on power specs, and recently even we've seen a lot of Condi Mirages picking up Chaotic Interruption as their trait and running it anyway, just to basically spam it out and get a lucky proc for really nasty immobilization and positive boons for themselves. I think that that's not a behavior the game should be encouraging. I think this mantra is just a little bit too strong. How I would change it, once again, recharges. I'd up the count recharge, another 10 seconds on there at least, 34 seconds, maybe longer. Careful Mirages that genuinely watch and wait, they'll get value out of it. But I think it's too much of, we're seeing it too much at the moment. I personally don't even run this skill, but I definitely think it's too strong. And I would just cull its access away a little bit. Next, I want to talk about Scepter. Scepter, I think, is too powerful. One of the things that's really swung people over to Scepter, since both Scepter and Axe have had lots of nerfs over the past 6 months. Both of them have been nerfed down a lot. But people are still generally on Scepter. And one of the reasons for this is how powerful Counterspell is. So Axe also has kind of a saving experience, right? It's got the Axe 3, which is a D-target and an evade. Scepter has a block into an evade at the same time. The thing about Illusory Counter, though, is it will activate very quickly and doesn't move you into, like, some heavily telegraphed movement or force you into melee range. Axe has those nasty undersides where if you want to use the defensive on Axe, you also then end up going deep on your target and can potentially take a lot more pressure. So generally, I want to see Counterspell change. What's particularly nasty is its synergy with, like, a quick weapon swap and dipping into that. Players can't really know when you're going to do it, and there's not really a way to move around it. But I'm okay with the Mesmer blocking and evading. What I'm not okay with is all the sudden damage that manifests across the map as long as you're within 900 range on the person that you countered. What I would like to see is when an illusory counter is procced, the torment that comes out of it, the 5 torment, and you'll see there's a lot of damage on there, that is associated with the projectile. Think about it. The autos are projectiles, the clones shoot projectiles, the ambush is a projectile, the flip over on this, if you do it early, is a projectile. Let's keep it as projectile oriented with the one saving grace being confusing images. Illusory counter, if you counter an attack, it should roll a projectile out that the player can now know, oh, I just got illusory countered, time to strafe or, you know, pop my own block or my own evade or walk away so I don't get hit by the 5 torment that's coming afterwards. But when you're going for a burst and the Mirage suddenly just weapon swaps uses 2 and they've completely swung the momentum in the other way, it doesn't feel very fun. I'd put a projectile on it so there's a little bit of counterplay, a little bit of visual gameplay going on with that as well. That's actually all I do with Scepter. There's other things I don't like about it too much, but I think that would leave it in kind of a nice place with Axe, actually, at that point. Next, I want to talk about Torch. I don't have one equipped, possibly don't have one on the character. I would just refine the Torch stealth down by another second and have the trait obviously help you improve it a little bit maybe. But yeah, I just don't like the access to stealth that Mesmers have now that Massive Viz has been buffed. Particularly, I'm thinking of power specs right now, obviously. I think just cutting that away a little bit reduces their escape potential, and I would leave that there. Next, I would also look at Staff. Staff is so ungodly powerful. It's like your defensive weapon and your offensive weapon with the ambushes. Now, I'm willing to leave the ambushes and whatnot alone as long as clone generation wasn't also so insane on Staff. And one of the reasons clone generation is so insane is because you're doing 2 warlocks for no reason. I would get rid of the double warlocks. It's visual noise, it's clone spam. I don't know why they made it 2 warlocks back with the big Phantasm Shatter update a while ago. Use the skill for a single Phantasm. Simple. And that would be my Staff nerf. It would still be an insanely powerful weapon, but it's a shave that needs to happen. And finally, False Oasis. False Oasis is by far one of the strongest Mesmer heals for most playstyles if you're ever a Mirage. It's extremely hard to justify giving up such a massive heal, vigor, and the fact it pulses a little bit over time can, in fact, be very strong as well. And a freaking mirror that drops afterwards. False Oasis is amazingly powerful. So let's nerf it by adding a slightly longer cast time. So in those Mesmer 1v1s, you can actually land the diversion a little bit more regularly. Or any 1v1, you can watch for the interrupt of the False Oasis. What particularly excites me about this is with the Mirage Cloak duration nerfs from before, you're not going to have every single Mirage covering their cast of their heal with a dodge roll anymore. There will be a slight window to be interrupted in the middle of it, and that culls it down massively when, you know, players who were watching for heal skills and stuff are fighting it. With all of those things together, I think Mirage would be a lot more fun to fight, and I really do advocate the entire block coming in at once. It would still be insanely powerful. You'll notice, as with many of these, I've not really touched damage potential on a lot of this stuff. I could keep going with Mirage, but that would probably be a bit too much of a pendulum swing at that if I went further. All right, so Ellie. I think since the last time I did a video and I've talked so much about the fire variants, people in general have become a lot more convinced by it, and the balance has swung to a place where you find more Fire Weavers than water, perhaps. And I think this is a good thing. Fire Weaver is obviously Glacier. There's more room for opponents to counter it. It has to be more careful about its cleanses. And so it's not in such an egregious place as I felt it was before. However, in terms of enjoyment fighting Weavers, it's still very low for me. There's basically little more to it than kiting away from their pyro vortexes and their primordial stances and just walking away for long enough until they've blown enough dodges and then try and chance and bursts on them. It's still not very fun. There's a lot I don't like about the side-noding Weaver experience. I frankly don't like how little Ellie has suitable roles in other areas of Conquest 2. So my nerfs would just be about that. First of all, I would add a cast time to primordial stance. I know it's a stance. I know the idea is we won't get these quick access. But if I could interrupt the primordial stance, or he had to take a very brief break to trigger it, I think maybe that might be a little bit more interesting for 1v1s. At least it's something to watch out for. Because obviously interrupting his stability source means a lot. Right? And so I think that would be kind of fun because then you could obviously CC lock afterwards at the end of it. I would make the same change as I wanted before. Twist of Fate, I would increase the count recharge by another 10 seconds or so, just so that the evade spamming is reduced a bit. And I talked about water and how often this is up last time. And I've been thinking more about this idea of increasing the cooldown on this. The thing with increasing cooldowns on weapon skills a lot is you got to think about the flow of playing the character and how unnatural it can feel if the cooldowns get too weird. And I think that's totally valid. So actually what I would rather do maybe is instead of increasing the cooldown on Riptide, let them have it as much, but reduce the length of time with which they're evading. That's almost 2 full seconds of evasion during that animation. So what I'm saying is speed the animation up and make it only like 3/4 of a second evade. So they just do it, and you can get back to doing the damage nice and quickly afterwards. And the same treatment for Earthen Vortex. The flow of playing the character doesn't change very much at all, but we dip in the ground and we come out. Very similar to the nerf to Blurred Frenzy on Mesmer a long time ago. It used to go very slowly, and it was actually more powerful for going slowly because it was evading for longer, allowing you to bridge the gap over into other cooldowns longer. Well, now the quicker animations might help that. It's a sideway. In some ways, it's a lateral movement to just speed up Riptide. If you speed up the speed of Riptide, because there's a movement skill as well, this actually moves you out of danger faster and gets you away from the node quicker too. So, you know, there's some upsides and downsides, but the binary nature of no longer evading, that's what it makes me enthusiastic, and I'd like to see that change. That's it. Those are the 3 differences I'd advocate. Maybe we can talk about Signet of Fire at some point in the future, but I don't see it being rendered that much at the moment. And besides, my knowledge on Weaver at the moment is lower than it could be, so I'll leave it there. So now let's look at Necro. As I said, this is a video all about nerfs, and Necro to me is an awful lot like Guardian. If I really think about it, how strong is core Necro? Well, it can 1v1 very well and it's okay on sides, but the second it gets plussed, it's mincemeat. How good is Reaper? Well, it has insane AoE cleave and damage, but it can be counter-pressured in incredible ways. It's very limited in where its damage comes from. Okay, how good is Scourge? Well, obviously the best of the 3. It has range. It has so much kite potential. It combos extremely well with Firebrand, supporting it, but also is kind of immobile and has specific avenues where it can do things. No matter what kind of Necro you're against, you can probably farm them. Most of the time. Outside of the hands of extremely skilled players, most Necros you can anticipate that they heal when they leave Shroud. Or you can wait until the Scourge has exhausted his barrier for the next bit of damage you throw in there. They're very clear, very well defined, very immobile. Good specs, I think, actually. I really like the place that Necro's in at the moment. They have incredible output, but clear rules around them. Most of their animations are fun and obvious to watch. You know, you can move out of shades. They're very telegraphed, and, you know, there's cast times on this stuff now. Ghastly Breach is easy to see. You can know to move away from Reapers when they go into Shroud. What's not to like? You know, Spectral Walk, for as power crept as it is now, is a really useful tool for Necros that enemies can, you know if you're going to teleport back and whatnot. So what do I want to nerf about them? I don't have anything that I think is really high priority. I genuinely don't. So here's the 2 things that I would say. Number 1, line of sight check on oppressive collapse. I hate that this thing goes through walls and can land anywhere when similar animations and other places in the game have line of sight checks. Just for consistency's sake, I think that they should have a line of sight check. And the first change I advocated today, the change to Sigil of Agility, is also a big nerf already to Oppressive Collapse. Because what you'll find a lot of Scourges do is they'll run like Agility and they'll weapon swap oppressive claps. So there's very little time. You see the ring appear and then it just immediately catches you. It's a powerful combo. That would no longer be accessible to them. Put a line of sight check on there as well. That's already a big change to Scourge and maybe a reason to look at other things outside of Torch slightly. I'd let this go through the walls still. Harrowing Wave. I don't mind a little bit of that, just like Engineer has Blunderbuss going through walls. But I think oppressive collapse, line of sight check. And the only other thing I'm thinking of is some of the Reaper variants and Focus. Obviously, more people are running Focus since the recent buffs. The Focus 4 has got the big hand now and whatnot. Spinal Shivers on Focus. It's a cool skill. I just hate how it's a tiny, subtle little animation where they just move their hand a bit and all of a sudden you're cracked for a ton of damage and loads of your boons have been ripped. I would just want a bigger telegraph on Focus 5. I actually think the cast time for Focus 5 is fine. The range is fine. All that stuff's fine. I just want a slightly bigger telegraph. Maybe that's my problem, an L2P thing, or WP, you should just look much more closely at the model of the Reaper 1200 range away from you. But let's be real. I just think a bit more of a telegraph on Focus 5, and I'd leave Necro there. I really would. I know some of you guys are going to be thinking about blood magic right now, and in the last time I talked about this, I talked about blood magic too, but somehow I feel somewhat softened to blood necros lately. I don't feel they're as swingy as they once upon a time were. Perhaps that's foolish of me. You guys can let me know. Ranger is up there with Rev for me. It is actually the single biggest class I want to see nerfs for in all of Conquest at the moment. Particularly, we're going to be talking about the Sikkim variant. We're not talking about more tanky, CC-oriented side nodey characters. We're not going to be talking about, you know, the crazy 1v1 core ranger spec, which is also very strong. We're not going to be talking about people who are still trying Druid. Druid has been nerfed enough, by God. No, I want to talk about really glassy longbow rangers. You only have to play this build for a couple of seconds to realize how ludicrously strong it is. You stand in clock tower mid and you're scoring kills on people at the side points without even having to go near there. Enemies go to res them, and oh look, you have hard CC at insane range as well that you can use to continue the fight. And on top of all of the crazy damage output, this thing has ludicrous escape potential, kite potential, and even to some degree 1v1 potential too. This thing is nuts. It's allowed to one-shot people from 1500 range, apply decent pressure afterwards from 1500 range, and it has so much mobility too, it can rotate to the next engagement almost instantly because it uses its mobility to create a bit of a distance, and then you're in 1500 range again because you've got so much range you don't even need to move that far, and yet you have all this movement at the same time. It's the ultimate snowball machine. Think about this thing on Legacy. You score a couple of kills at mid, in fractions of a second you're already pew-pewing the next guy down. Some maps it's admittedly stronger than others, but this thing desperately needs to be refined away. I think the Balance team should be deeply embarrassed they ever let Soul Beast get to the state it's in at the moment. It's horrendous. Some of the only things that were holding it in check was all the excessive mirror uptime on Mirages and whatnot in the past, but with that nerfed, these things have been running rampant. So let's roll through. My first change would be point blank shot. They did talk in a recent update with Blunderbuss, I think it was, that's changed, where they have skills like this that scale based on various criteria that they were going to look at them and try this new tech and this new method for them. Well, point blank shot is such a skill, and I actually have very high confidence that they might change it next patch because of what we saw with Blunderbuss. So this is a knockback when you're really close, and it's a longer knockback when you're very close, and then the further away they are, the less of a knockback it does. This is still way too strong, okay? My recommended change for this is this. It's a knockback if you actually use it in point blank range. It's point blank shot, you knock back at that point. If you spam this on the opening from 1200 range, it shouldn't be a CC at all. It can just be some damage. It's so brain dead the way that people play this build at the moment. Just opening on the point blank shot. Everyone who does that should be punished. It should do 0 CC when it's over a certain range threshold. Further, when you're in that middle ground, like say 600 to 900 or somewhere thereabouts, it can still be a CC, but I would turn it into a daze instead of a knockback. So it actually is a strong CC only in those environments. And for the rest of it, that immediately does a lot to make Longbow not feel so good, so ridiculously strong. By the way, for all these nerfs, you're not actually going to see me affect the animation speed, the velocity, the damage packets, or even the modifiers here. It's all just stuff about counterplay that I'm mostly interested in. So speaking of which, let's talk about Greatsword. Greatsword is incredibly strong. There's two big nerfs I'd like for it. First, let's talk about the parry. This parry is like the strongest parry in the game. Look how long this lasts. Look at that. It's a ludicrous amount of time that you can just be kiting around and enjoying yourself, and then in the last moment suddenly turn around and turn it into a hard CC. This thing is stupid, probably only need to be 1.5 seconds of a parry, and that immediately refines away some of the strength that Greatsword has. It's really important that when you play this build, you utilize counterattack very well, and taking away that super OP tool, I think is extremely important. Obviously, you can like double maul someone for 12k a pop. This is a very aggressive weapon with a lot of mobility on already. It doesn't need all the blocks. So I would definitely refine this away and reduce the parry duration. Next, let's look at Soul Beast traits. A lot of this has been skill-oriented, as you guys can tell, because I'm interested in skill animations and being able to see things visually in the game. But this is a busted trait that probably needs to be changed. It's called Unstoppable Union, and it means that you become unblockable when you merge with your pet. So you can now unblockably point blank shot, or you can unblockably hilt bash, or you can unblockably one-shot the warrior in shield bash, or you can shoot through all the projectile mitigation that the firebrand is put up, or whatever is going on with your various longbow skills. This trait is insane. I remember when Path of Fire first came out thinking how nuts this looked, and it needs to go away. On top of all of this, it's also a stun break. Now, the stun break actually feels really good to access and is really worthwhile for a lot of builds. So I say, it's called Unstoppable Union. Having it simply be break stun when you merge with a pet, I could still find myself using that on occasion over the other traits in this rung. It would still be powerful and worthwhile, and it would still fit with the idea of an unstoppable union. You're stun breaking. You can't stop me. I'm on the floor. I'm back up again. Get rid of the unblockableness. That alone is huge, and that is one of the biggest outliers. That would be my big nerf for Ranger, I think. Actually, all of these are actually really major. Next, let's look at Lesser Quickening Zephyr. So, basically, a lot of the builds here are running Zephyr Speed. Whenever they swap pets, they proc this survival skill, Lesser Quickening Zephyr, which double Condi cleanses for them and gives them 3 seconds of super speed. The quickness obviously allows them, and the fury allow them to be super aggressive. But this combination here of being able to take these two Grandmasters where you're cleansing on survival skills, and now every time you pet swap, it's a survival skill that's cleansing you, is way too strong. This is where a lot of their escape potential comes from. So what I say is, you see the 3 seconds of super speed that you're getting from that? Drop it down to 1 second of super speed. This build has enough mobility as it is. It doesn't also need to be a super speed king. So it's actually a lot more vulnerable, and it doesn't escape from this stuff. Again, I think these things refine this build massively. You can still get your cheesy one-shots, but against anyone competent, they can now actually catch you. And then finally, on the topic of mobility, I would take either Greatsword Swoop, or I would take Owl Swoop. So here I'm on Gazelle. Obviously, some people run Gazelle. Not everybody runs Owl, right? I would take one of these two, and I would half their leap duration. But right now, basically doing this, and then this, and then dropping out and super speeding away, and then maybe even popping this for even more super speed, and I've just covered the distance of any PvP map I like, and then turning around from 1500 range and pew-pewing someone back. It's just too far over the line. I do like the idea of having mobile rangers, but my favorite implementation of mobility on ranger is actually sword. I think sword is really cool. Using the about phase, jump backwards, then jump forwards again. So if you're going to nerf one of them, maybe go the greatsword instead of the owl, since owl wasn't on everyone anyway. And then maybe you're encouraging people to pick up sword a bit more. That's Ranger. Those are my proposals. I would still let you have the fantasy of getting your own Sikkim for 40% damage modifier, but no more easy escapes. So, let's look at Thief next. Thief is pretty close, basically, to how I feel with Guardian and Necromancer at the moment, in that I don't actually think it really deserves a ton of nerfs. I think Thief does one thing, and it does it very well. I think you don't very easily reap benefits from stacking thieves, and that's quite unique for Thief as a profession. You don't really mind stacking a lot of the other stuff, but stacking thieves obviously feels really bad. And I think that it's generally not been power crept, unlike a lot of the other things in the game for a long time. I like the Thief builds. I think that the way that they play is really interesting. I actually think, if anything, they're about average, and I wouldn't affect it too much. I really wouldn't. But if we're doing only nerfs, I do have 2 really important changes. One of them is something I'm bringing over from my previous discussion, and that's Daggerstorm. Daggerstorm insta-refreshing, so you can double cast it based on RNG off of a good proccing still feels horrendous. Or even I've lost 1v1s that I never should have because they got lucky enough for 3 Daggerstorms in a row. It's a horrible feeling. It's the kind of RNG Guild Wars was never trying to embrace, and I think that it should be done away with. The simple method is, this is not a unique or novel suggestion I'm offering here, is to simply stop this from being a trick. You can either look at that, or you can look at the inner workings of improvisation and see if you want to change something there. But yeah, the double and triple casted Daggerstorms, based on just chance, I don't think are fun. I really don't. And even when I'm playing a thief and I score kills because I double cast Daggerstorm, I sort of feel like I got the kill and yay, that's fun, but I know I didn't really do very well, and I know I wouldn't really still be there or doing well if it wasn't just that I'd done that. I mean, and how hard is it to do this? Learn not to press steal while you're in the Daggerstorm. Wait for it, wait for it. Now press steal. Oh, look, we got it back, for example. Like, come on. There's not much to it, and it's way too strong. So let's get rid of that still. And then the other change I'd really like is to SD. So I still want a little bit more of a balance between SD and DP. We can talk about some of the other weapon sets afterwards, but these are the important things to me. And the one thing I would change about SD is Dancing Dagger. I think too many thieves find too much success spamming Dancing Dagger on people on kite spots and just while chasing people down. I hate dying because it bounces so many times while I've completely outplayed the thief, and then they just get lucky and they manage to kill, and they just drain their endurance doing this. If a thief's going to pressure me while I'm kiting, he had best be forced to swap to short bow. I think that's only fair, and then there's a little bit more counterplay available to both of you, and you can really see how good they are. But there's too many thieves right now that don't even know how amazing short bow is, and they do well because they just run around spamming this. This is not fun or interesting gameplay. So I would actually just nerf this is the first time you've seen this. Nerf the damage on Dancing Dagger. The Cripple and the Torment I think are really useful tools and fun. I would nerf the damage. I even think leaving it at 3 bounces is fine. Because I like the idea of it scaling a little bit more in higher group scenarios. But I would nerf the damage of it. I suppose the other way you could go is with initiative. But I feel a bit out of my depth advocating initiative changes. So I won't go that far. That's it for Thief. That is genuinely all I would talk about for it. Let's go to now the final class. That's Engineer. So as you can probably guess, when it comes to matters of Engineer, we're mostly going to be talking about Hollow. Obviously, Scrapper had all the recent buffs. But I don't think Scrapper is that bad. I really don't. I think it's got clear avenues of counterplaying it by rotating away from it. I don't think it scales very well at fights. I think it even loses some 1v1s based on the matchups and the specific style of Scrapper that's running. I actually find myself being more intimidated by prot Hollows than I do by Scrappers. God's honest truth at the moment. So I don't have any recommendations for Scrapper. The only thing I could think is maybe something to do with the Sneak Gyro again. But, you know, they buffed Mass Invis, so now if you're going to nerf one, do you have to nerf the other? And I'm just not really too interested in looking at that. But let's look at Hollow, which I still think is pretty strong. And I've been playing a bit more of it recently as well, and I think I can identify some of the other things that are very powerful about it. So one of the things I really don't like about Hollow is how it can drop out of Forge straight into hard CC in a moment's notice, right? So we can leave Forge and straight away overcharge shot. That little maneuver there is extremely powerful, especially considering that Corona Burst will often give you stability while you're in Forge. You know, obviously if you hit a target, and then you're not going to self-CC yourself on the overcharge shot. That's like such a powerful thing, and I don't like that it's powerful because you can't know exactly. It's a bit like what I was talking about with Mirage and the weapon swap Scepter 2 thing before. So, what I actually would like to do, first of all, is just look at overcharge shot. I know a lot of people think that the CC is too much on it because it's a launch and, you know, it lasts for so long. And the self-knockback used to balance this, but now there's so much stab in the game, it's not really so relevant, or particularly on the Hollow playstyle. But I would actually leave all of its potency the same. Again, what I'd just like to see is a slight cast on it. That's all I'd like to see, or drop the velocity. So I can see the overcharge shot is coming, I can dodge it a little bit more reliably, a little bit more regularly. In fact, what I'd really like to see is, in addition to that, we take the Corona Burst trait and have it so that Corona Burst doesn't proc stab on both ticks, but only the second tick. Because Corona Burst, a quickness Corona Burst straight out of Photon Forge is extremely hard to avoid. The second one is really fun and easy to watch for, and that's, you know, quite enjoyable. So if you load just the stab onto that, what that means is Hollows still have stab, and they can drop and they can pop their thing, but they only have one stack now. So if you CC the Hollow, you rip one stack, and when he overcharge shots, he self-CCs himself, right? So if we just lower the CC, the stability access that Hollows get, so they can still cover themselves with stab, but when it comes to combining with overcharge shot, you're still worth crowd controlling them because they're going to do the second bit and thus screw themselves. I think we're having a lot of fun. So that's what I advocate for Corona Burst, and I actually advocate for Elixir U as well. Look at the boons on this. The only thing I'm asking for is change Elixir U to just give 1 stack of stability instead of 2. Again, so that if he's Elixir U'd, and I know he's on rifle, I can throw a random CC on him, and now when he's like, haha, I'm gonna overcharge shot, he rips his second stack and, you know, is vulnerable to that counter pressure, and it sort of hits the uptime a little bit. So I think that that's a very subtle thing that I'm advocating for Hollow there, but actually does improve a bit of counterplay. Next is a thing that I advocated previously, and that's to reduce Toss Elixir S duration. It's 6 seconds of stealth. This could be half, even less. I like the idea of using this to save allies by throwing on bodies, and you can do that with basically way less stealth duration. I think most of the playmaking potential at high levels on Hollow is using your mobility in Elixir S to suddenly jump on people, make it look like you're disengaging when you're not and whatnot. And it's because you get so many seconds. Obviously, that's alchemy traded. What I'm saying is with alchemy, be 3 seconds. Without alchemy, be even less. I mean, the alchemy GM, of course, we're talking about HDH. So, yeah, and I think that's a very, very important thing. I'd reduce the stealth duration. In general, culling stealth duration is really important. I was very close to saying it on Ranger as well, but I didn't in the end. I decided maybe they can have their longbow stealth at the same time. And then finally, I think I had this change before, but holographic shockwave. This skill is a massive radius that is very, very disrespectful. It doesn't care about the Z-axis very much. So you cast this pretty much anywhere in a team fight. You're going to get someone to dodge. Most people will have to dodge or blow stab or be ready for this. Otherwise, they're blown out. They're launched, guys. This is a 0 launch, but it still is the full duration of a launch. And I say leave all the potency, that's fine, but the radius is too high, especially with how this works on the Z-axis. I would curtail the radius just a bit, so this doesn't hit so many people so often. When I'm focusing the golem, I hate that the game is set up right now that while I'm focusing the golem and doing this fight, I have no care in the world for the guy behind me, but I've just blown one of his powerful resources. He's had to dodge roll to get towards me because the radius is so high. Or maybe I've even CC'd him, right? It's just too much quality of life. It's like that brain dead style thing. So, yeah, I would pull that away. And that's what I'd say I would change for Hollow. Just little things, right? Just little animation-oriented things that open more avenues for counterplay. You can keep all the pressure and the damage. If people don't know how to dodge these things or to look for them, then you can still devastate. But that's where I think Conquest will become more fun. All these specs that we see in abundance being ran around all the time, they're all more fun to fight if some of these changes go through. So that's what I think. That's how I feel about balance right now before whatever the next balance patch is. A lot of you guys are asking for my thoughts and feelings on it. And there you have it. Hope you guys enjoy. I'll see you next time. As a post-video edit, I do want to note as well, there's an interesting thing at play here that I realize the balance team must have to think about. Different balance is suitable based on how frequently we get balance. So what I've advocated here, you may personally feel is not enough, right? You might think that I haven't gone deep enough with it, but what I'm actually proposing is a more incremental style balance patch that would flourish in an environment where we get fairly regular balance. However, if this was the only balance for like half a year, I'd be advocating greater swings and bigger changes. But, you know, we're only talking about nerfs in this video as well, but I find that an interesting interplay as well. So just to be clear, that's kind of my outlook for a patch like this. It would be one amongst, you know, several semi-regular patches rather than just the one thing for us to live on for months and months and months and months and months. But yeah, all right, hope you guys enjoyed. See you next time.